Almost 2 years ago, I ran my third 100-mile race, and it did not go well. At least it wasn't what I wanted. People have told me it's a pretty good time. It probably is when you look at like averages and finishing time and whatnot. But it's not what I wanted. I ran Zion 100, and it took me over 26 hours. It's about 11,000 feet of vertical gain. And I've been a road runner mostly up until that point, and I wanted to get into trails. New challenge. I like the mountains. It's fun to be in nature like that. And so I worked really hard, and I trained really hard to get there, and I pretty much crashed at mile 30. I was not respecting the race, but I had set a course record for a 100-mile race that was on the road and a 50-mile race a year before that. And so I was like, I'm going to be able to crush this. Actually, it might have been within 6 months before, which that's another point. It was probably too much in too short of time. And I'm coming back for redemption. And so in about 2.5 months, I have Zion 100 again, 2 years later. Last year didn't really go well with running, so I deferred. And I'm coming back for 24 hours and sub 24 hours. I wanted to talk about some of the things that I am doing to get to that point, and whether you're trying to break sub 24 or you're just interested in 100-mile races, I think this will help you. Or maybe you don't want 100-mile races. I think generally training methodologies vary for the race distance, but there's some base core principles that I think are helpful for everyone. And so there's about 5 points I'm going to hit today. First one's super simple, strength training. I love the gym. When I wasn't feeling very good with my running over the last year and a half, I spent a lot of time in the gym. And when I've done well and set PRs or won races, I've spent time in the gym. And I think the strength is so important in general. But when it comes to ultras, I think about how if you're taking, I'm just throwing out random numbers, I don't know how accurate this is. If you're doing 5,000 steps for 10 miles, right? Well, I got to 10x that, 50,000 steps, and I think it's probably more if I were to look at my races. And so that's 10x more my legs have to bear, or even just being able to hold my body up properly. And so strength training, I'm always going to be an advocate for, and there's a lot of different ways to go about that. But as a runner, I just go 3 times a week. I do a push-pull legs right now, so push muscles, pull on another day, and then legs. And I typically do my legs after my tempo workouts, which is the next thing I want to talk about. So there's a lot of different tempo type workouts. There's intervals, there's fartlek, there's repeats of certain things. And for me, I am focused more on lactate threshold. And to kind of define that for running, it's basically when you find your lactate threshold, that's the point where the lactic acid that is produced is past the point of where you can filter it out or work through it, right? So to stay below that or right on that line, your body's able to process it better or at that point without blowing up. And so there's a lot of conversation around VO2 max, and I'm not the smartest runner in the world, but from what I've been talking about with my uncle who reads all the articles is that when it comes to these longer distances, yes, the VO2 max, of course, you want that. Oxygen is good, right? But for me, I'm not doing these 5Ks. I'm needing to sustain fast effort for a very long time, right? And so obviously I'm going to break down throughout the race, but if I can continue maintaining those 10 or 9-minute miles, depending on the course, that's what's going to help me more. So I've been focusing a lot more on that, and I'm going to make a video on lactate threshold, at least what I'm learning, because this is a little bit newer training philosophy for me. I've done tempo, of course, but the biggest thing I've always focused on is zone 2 or base runs, and that's my next point. So I'm doing a lot of easy runs, and there's different ways to calculate your heart rate zones. I'd go look up a video on how to find my heart rate zones for running, and I've spent most of my time in zone 2, and the reason for that is it builds that aerobic endurance, which is healthy. It also gets you used to volume, and if all your runs are super high heart rate, you're just at a risk of injury, because that's pretty high intensity. And also you miss out on this idea of building a base. And this is huge in running. The way my uncle explained it to me is if you have a sand pile, you're trying to build it as high as you can on the beach, once you get to a certain height, it just continues to slope down, right? You might be able to get it a foot or two, and then if you keep stacking it, it just slides down, right? Because it's too steep. And so the base, and you build this with zone 2 or aerobic running, zone 1, 2. the base is the same thing where you're widening that base of the sandcastle, and when you have that wide base, you're able to go further up top, right? You're able to increase in your speed, if you will, or intensity. And so it's important for me to be able to have that base, because then I can stack things on top of that. But also, I'm no pro. I'm not running a 6-minute mile, 100-miler. Like I'm not averaging 6.5 minutes, 7 minutes. It's probably going to be closer to 12, or if I'm having a good day, 10. And I mean, that would be what I would like to get to. But in all reality, I don't think I'm quite there yet. And so building the base is super important. That's a big piece of what I think any training plan should have, because it just, whether you're a short distance runner or a longer distance, the base is always good for you. And those easy runs are very helpful in just becoming more fit. And then you can stack the intensity on top of it. The idea is you could potentially plateau with your speed if the base isn't wide enough. And I mean, it's nice to go out and not have to go too hard sometimes. It's nice to just enjoy yourself, be able to breathe. You're not like dying the whole run. And so I think that has been a big part of my success, and something a lot of runners are missing out on. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is yoga. I'm a certified yoga teacher. I think stretching in general is not used as much as it should in running. Everyone talks about it, but it's one of the first things people forget about or are undisciplined with. And so here's one thing I would find, like for me, when I have pains or I'm worried that an injury is coming up as a runner, what I've found oftentimes is it's just tightness. So I have a philosophy that most injuries are due to a lack of mobility or a lack of strength. And so a lot of the times when you have a pain, it might just be because you're tight. Like, for example, your knee hurts, right? Runner's knee is a big problem out there. And sure, there's actual damage that can happen, or you can tear something. But like runner's knee, I had that for a while. And what I did is I just stretched the hell out of my quad. Like, that's what fixed it. And usually it's something you got to like take time off for months or whatever. And I kept running and I stretched my quad. And it makes sense to me, because if my knee is like hurting, then maybe these muscles surrounding it are pulling on it. And the quad or IT band is typically very tight for people, especially runners. And so instead of jumping to I need time off, or maybe I'm injured and I need to get an x-ray, sure, do that if you feel like you need, or you've taken the time off and it hasn't gotten better. But sometimes it just boils down to stretching and being a little bit more mobile and loose. So big believer in stretching all the way. It's helped me with a lot of what I thought was injuries, and it's just good for recovery. So one thing to simplify it and not overwhelm yourself, because maybe doing 5 1-hour yoga sessions a week is too much, I'll just stretch after every single run. It goes a very long way, and it doesn't take long. Anywhere from like 5 to 10 minutes, just holding static poses. I think it's very helpful, because if you've been putting an effort for your run, your muscles have been contracting, you've been pushing. As you cool down, or at least in my experience, I tend to tighten up. And then if I'm going throughout that whole day, fall asleep, wake up the next day, right, maybe I didn't really open that back up. And so I do a little bit of static stretching afterwards to lengthen the muscles. So then as I cool down, I can relax a little bit. And it's helped a ton. I've done some crazy things in running and been able to avoid injuries. Like, for example, when I ran 10 marathons in 10 days, I stretched after every run. I mean, it hurt. That was a long 10-day cycle. But I feel like the stretching was a big part of me being able to stay alive, if you will, and be able to avoid injury. So I would rather a runner, and sometimes I have to do this for myself due to time, I would rather a runner shave off a half a mile or a mile on the run and throw in 5 to 10 minutes of stretching than get that extra volume. And it goes a very long way, and I want to be able to do this for the rest of my life. So I need to be able to make sure I'm healthy, especially when I'm doing things like ultras and pushing that far. Last thing, long runs. Everyone's heard of a long run if you're a runner. And this is where I can really practice like nutrition, and I can throw in some tempo if I want. But for me, this is probably, I don't know, all the type of workouts are my favorite, but there's something about long runs where you're gone for a couple hours, depending on where you're at, or in the trails especially. It's like you're away from civilization for a few hours. And there's something very healing or spiritual about that for me. And of course, you're just getting in volume, and you can practice nutrition, and you can solve problems, and you can think through things or do it with a friend. And those have always been so helpful, obviously, because if I'm going to run 100 miles, I got to be able to run 20 or 30. And so I'll have a long run every single weekend, but I'll be trickling in back-to-back long runs, which is big for ultras, where I might run 20 miles and run 20 miles the next day, or 20 and 15, or wherever, depending on my training block. I used to do this pretty much every weekend, and I'm at this point where I think I have a pretty good base, and I don't need to be beating myself up that much, because I need to get what I need out of my tempo workouts or my lactate threshold runs. So I'm just doing the long runs, and maybe every 3 weeks or something like that, I'll do a back-to-back long run. So that's my plan. It will adapt, but those are like 5 core components in me being able to train for the sub 24 hours, and it's in 2.5 months. So we'll see how it goes. If you like running content, my name is Reese Jones, and I'm just here to help people run and enjoy it and avoid injury. So I hope I get to see you in another video sometime soon. Peace.